Welcome to AdSpeak, Adweek's podcast about the business of marketing, media, and creativity. In this episode, we're sharing a conversation recorded live at Brand Week, featuring leaders from across the industry discussing the ideas shaping brands right now. Let's get into it.
How's everyone doing today? It's past the mid-lunch slump, so I appreciate you all making it out, listening. But I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about my favorite reminder that I like to give marketers, and that is to stop chasing big numbers. And the reason why I want marketers to stop chasing big numbers is because big doesn't always mean meaningful, especially when it comes to social media. Now, social media, from our experiences, is the place where culture gets made. Social media is the place where trends, ideas, concepts get cut. It's also the place where influencers and content creators develop content that can set the tone for culture, for society. It's also the place where communities organize, and it also ends up becoming the place where purchase decisions and behaviors are very heavily influenced. Now, despite the varied and broad impact that social media can have, there is yet to be a widely adopted metric or method that actually does social justice. You think about your impressions, your views, your likes, your reach, and what we're really just doing with those metrics is we're just counting. And then you think about metrics that were specifically designed for social and influencer and organic, and the origin of those metrics actually date back to the print and TV era and haven't actually evolved at the speed of social. And so that's really our purpose today, and our objective is we wanted to create a new metric that you all can take away, apply to your business. Say first thing, Thursday morning when you open up your laptop after the conference, you can start to use this metric to understand how you're doing on social and to inspire you what to do on social. Now, in addition to this simple, easy-to-use metric, I'm also going to pull back the curtain a little bit on how we operate at Viral Nation and share with you how we have taken that metric and integrated it as a core part of our operations. How we're collecting hundreds of thousands of social posts on a daily basis, how we're using AI to enrich those data sets that we're collecting on the score to better inform what actually drives the score, and how we're using technology to do things like visualize data, also to use LLMs and AI to be able to make this data much more accessible. That way people can actually act on it. Now, when we think about what inspired us to do this is we really just wanted to do better work for our brands. We wanted to just figure out how can we actually control the outcomes from the social programs that we were running. And so you're probably wondering, who is Viral Nation? Who am I? And why do we get to talk about this topic? So Viral Nation is a social media company, and we like to say that we engineer social media performance. Now, what we do is everything from social content, creator content, influencer marketing, paid social, but the through line across all of those things that we execute is intelligence. Now, we have our own proprietary data, AI, technology that we use in order to make social media much more measurable, optimizable, and thus repeatable place. And that's where I come into play. So my name's Rochelle, and I lead our business intelligence and data strategy vision. And I spend nearly all of my day trying to figure out what other signals can we get to better inform social so that we can better understand how to drive outcomes with this medium. Now, as you can tell, and as you've probably experienced, social has historically had almost no data, so this is a really hard challenge. Now, another thing I like to say about myself and my career is I've always been drawn by measuring things that are hard to measure, and social is especially hard to measure, and that's what brought me to this space. Now, if we want to break down what makes social really hard to measure, it's first because of black box metrics. You've got your social algorithms that decide what you see on your feed, that decide when you see me on your feed. And the challenge with social algorithms is we don't have explicit understanding what actually goes into it. We might have some guesses, we might have some hypotheses on what's driving that algorithm, but it's constantly changing. The other challenge with metrics within the social space is I've been talking about the walled gardens for over a decade. That's been challenged for the last 10 years at minimum. But the challenge is privacy and data restrictions are increasing, and it's even harder to understand what's going on in social, especially cross-platform. The next issue is vanity doesn't always equal value. So earlier I talked about impressions, views, reach. we have no way of knowing whether or not those metrics actually will eventually drive payback on your investment on social. We don't know if those metrics are actually related to whether or not you're more culturally relevant or whether or not people are resonating with your content. Now, for the same reason, the metrics that we tend to use in social also don't necessarily have that important why layer. When you're looking at 10 million impression scorecard in your dashboard, you don't really know what drove that 10 million impressions. And, because of that, you don't really know what you should do next going forward to be able to repeat that outcome, or you don't know what you need to do next in order to double that outcome. Now, who here has heard of earned media value? There's a lot of folks. Now, I have the biggest bone to pick with this metric. And for those who don't know, earned media value actually originated back in the 40s in the print era. They would literally take a ruler to an article in a newspaper and equate the value of that article to an ad of the same size. And so if we think about it, that's pretty silly. It doesn't necessarily mean value. But what's wild is we are actually still using a variation of earned media value today. So almost all social or creator platforms have a variation of earned media value in their technology. And I have spent so much time talking to product leaders, reading the documentation to understand how they calculate it. And despite having deep access to the fine print, I still don't know what goes on behind earned media value and how to actually calculate it. Some platforms might weight YouTube views as higher, some might weight X engagements as higher. But as I get deeper into it, what I've learned is sometimes those decisions are made not because we think YouTube views is what drives impact, but because of things like API openness, or they might have a static data point internally that said that was important. Now, if earned media value is not it, then what makes for a good metric? Now, for us, a good metric is first something that's tied to business outcomes. So if you were to optimize for this metric, it'll eventually drive the goal that you're striving for. Second, it needs to be trackable. It needs to be benchmarkable. So what I mean by trackable is you should be able to pull it today, yesterday. You should be able to pull it tomorrow when your campaign goes live. Now, the reason why you want it to be trackable is you want something that you can get at a high frequency, that you can use as an indicator to optimize your program before it's too late. You don't want to wait for your end of year, market mix model results. You don't want to wait for your end of quarter brand lift study. We also want it to be benchmarkable. So when you pull that metric, you want to be able to understand how are you doing versus other brands in your competitive set. You want to understand how you're doing against other brands that you aspire to be. And then the final, and I think the most important element of a good metric is it needs to be diagnostic. So you need to get some signal as to what's driving that outcome when you look at that metric and track it through time. Now, that's what brings us to our score. So we spent a lot of time trying to think about what really is the core purpose of social. And when we distill it down, the purpose of social really is for people to connect with each other. Now, a brand, when they're on social, they're there because they want to understand their audience. They want their audience and them to have deep conversations. They want their audience to better understand them. And the way we see that is cultural relevance. And when we see cultural relevance present online, what we tend to see happen is you earn awareness. People see you in more relevant conversations. We see you deepen trust, deepen authenticity and credibility with your audiences because you're signaling that you get the communities that you're trying to speak to. And with all of that, it also helps amplify and expedite conversion. Now, that's how we arrived at these three parts of our cultural relevance score. And the first is awareness. So what we're asking with the score is measuring for cultural presence. So 1, are you visibly present in relevant conversations? The second part of the score is tracking for affinity, whether or not you're driving that cultural alignment. So are people actually responding positively to you? And then the final piece is velocity, in other words, cultural energy. So is your engagement growing faster than the category baseline? Now, you'll notice that in this score, we're tracking for the quantity. So we're actually seeing how many conversations you're part of. But a deep part of the score is actually also tracking the quality of it. So you get insight into whether or not people are actually receptive to that message. It's not important just to be part of it. It's important that you're doing it in a way that's authentic to your brand. You're doing it in a way that's actually connecting with your audiences. Now, every time I talk about culture and relevance with brands, the number one question I get is, why should we care? And what we find is cultural relevance actually converts. It's actually tied to business outcomes. So we see this, with the brands that we work with individually, having run a number of mixed studies and ROI studies, we do see that there is a strong relationship at a brand level between cultural relevance and output. We see this in our meta-analysis work, but we also see it increasingly validated in other academic research, validated in other marketing thought leadership. And so what we see ultimately is every component of our cultural relevance score does eventually drive to a lift in sales and revenue. Now getting to how we actually calculate that score. So the first part of the score is calculated by awareness, or in other words, what is your relevant mention volume versus comparators? Second is, what is your net sentiment versus comparators? And then third, what is your engagement growth versus comparators? So you'll notice a couple of things. One is it's pretty simple. It's not a super hard metric to understand, and that was by design. We want to know what goes into it, so you want to know what comes out of it. I think we have a lot of modeled numbers in marketing, and it's nice to just see a number and metric exist as is. Second, this is completely trackable. So you can pull this today, you could pull it tomorrow when your campaign goes live. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can pull it. One is you can do it manually. That would be a lot of work, but if you wanted to, you can get a spreadsheet out, start tracking your mentions, competitive mentions. Second, you could probably use one of the social listening or content posting tools. I think a lot of brands have access to that. But the way we do it is we're actually collecting hundreds of thousands of social posts on a daily basis. So we're ingesting those posts, it's media, and we're also tracking on a time series basis how those posts are doing against the score. Now, the other thing you'll notice in this score is it's benchmarkable. So every component of the score is inherently comparative. So your comparative set could be, your direct competitors in your category. One of the brands that we work with, who is the leading mortgage tech company in the US, they want to be the most culturally relevant brand in America. So they're actually comparing against your Duolingo, your Nike, your Fenty Beauty. Now, that score is simple. And again, our intention is everyone to have a new social currency that helps you actually do better on social. That's our intention. But I want to also give you inspiration on where the score can go and how you can actually think about setting the right data foundation for social media. So the first thing that we've done, as I've mentioned a couple of times, is we're collecting hundreds of thousands of social posts. What that enables us to do is we actually have ways where we can see how is a score changing day by day. We can get insight into the seasonality behind that score. We can get insight into the different ways we can cut that score and how it changes results. We get a standard read on things like platform, content type, things of that sort. But we also wanted to get even deeper into predictive analytics to understand what attributes actually drive that score. So of the hundreds of thousands of posts we're collecting on a daily basis, we're actually ingesting the media as well. So it's not just the post link, the caption, we're actually looking at the video. And from the video and using AI, we're able to codify hundreds of attributes that can actually drive impact. So think of things like content style, tonality, colorway, call to action, the number of times a brand is mentioned. Now, early days in research, you used to have people who were data coders, and they would actually code 1, 2, or 3 on whether or not something exists in a piece of content. We can actually do this in less than an hour now, over hundreds of attributes because of AI. And then the final piece is we've actually integrated the score into more advanced measurement techniques. So one of our clients is the leading VR headset client in the US. And we work hand in hand with their data and decision sciences team, and they take a variation of the score in their what they call vector autoregression modeling, which effectively just tells them what is the ROI of social. And they've seen that they've had a much stronger relationship with this score in sales, and it's been able to help them actually understand the revenue impact of this medium. Now, we've also integrated culture quotient scoring to our market mix models. So in lieu of using impressions as an independent variable and input in those models, we're actually using the cultural quotient score. And it's really helped us better understand what is the relationship between social media and the outcome. When historically, it was almost impossible to measure organic social because you don't have that time series daily read. Us doing this has made it possible for us to actually understand the revenue impact of this space. So I want to walk you through a case study. I love fashion. We're just off the heels of New York Fashion Week, and we were their official partner this past season. And we calculated their score at the end of it all, and we also tracked it, but they did incredibly well. Now, every component of the score is indexed against 100. It is next to impossible to get a score of 100. So 80% is incredibly strong. And so I'll walk you through some of what we had behind the scenes to be able to help them get to that outcome. So first is we gave them a dashboard. We actually give all of our clients a dashboard as part of your program. And in that dashboard, we were able to give them how is their score performing on a daily basis, cut it by all of the standard attributes like content type, platforms, things of that sort. Second is we wanted to go even deeper. So as mentioned, we can codify in hundreds of attributes that drive performance. For them, we actually did it specific for fashion and New York Fashion Week. So we don't just have 100 for every single category. We understand there's different attributes that might drive impact for fashion versus beauty versus technology. Now, once we developed that database specific for New York Fashion Week, we then mapped that database to an AI readable layer, and we used LLMs to help better understand how our data connects. Now, this has helped us significantly in our ability to democratize data across the business and with our clients. So, you don't need someone who knows SQL. You don't need someone who knows how to even read a data table. They can literally write using natural language in a chat interface what their question is. And then they'll get a response in real words. They'll get a table of the data. They'll get the chart. And what's cool is you can also, for people who are more experienced with data, they can look at the underlying SQL query so there's no hallucinations. Now, what's even cooler is because of this interface and because of our application of AI, you can also append to this unstructured data. So if New York Fashion Week has brand guidelines deck that they want to use for this coming year, they can append it in their query or their question in this interface, and it can connect the two. It can connect unstructured data with the structured data that we've got. And so again, our goal really and our motivation was how do we do better work for our clients? And this has really helped everyone from an analyst to a strategist to a content marketer to be able to understand how to use data to inform their strategy. So bringing that all back to New York Fashion Week, so we were able to drive a 125% increase in impact from 24 to 2025. But I think the biggest win for us wasn't just, this really big number that we were able to drive, but we're also able to give them a very tactical, specific playbook as to how they arrive there. We were able to understand what colors really landed with their audiences, the emotions and feelings those colors connoted. We're able to understand how backstage content versus runway content landed with their audiences. And so they can actually take this as a playbook for their next season so that they can repeat this outcome or do even better. All right, so I talked about a score that you can take away, you can apply, but I also want to give you inspiration on how you can set the right data foundation, because historically social has been seen as a place that has no data, but we've really found a way to crack that nut and find signals to help inform the space. And the way we were able to do that is, one, through integrated historical data infrastructure. So long before the onset of AI, we've actually been collecting a lot of social media content through time. We have a brand safety technology within Viral Nation where we actually are collecting, the past 20 years of a profile's information. And so that actually helped set up the right data foundation so that once AI started to pick up, we actually had the right information that helped, inform AI work that we were doing. Second is we have AI that understands culture. So we've got generative and multimodal AI models that are able to capture cultural nuances. And we're spending a lot of time even refining what those attributes are, tracking things like tonality, messaging, call to action. There's many things that we're testing and refining so that we're better able to detect it so we can control for outcomes in social. We've got cross-platform content. So we're not just looking at Instagram, but we're also looking at most of your social channels. And then finally, everything is based on outcomes. So what's cool being a researcher and someone focused on data at this organization is we're not just a research company. We're not just intelligence. We're actually executing on what we're learning from our intelligence. And so it's been cool to be able to look at what's already existing and happening in market, but then also applying it and testing it. So we're constantly iteratively testing and refining the underlying attributes that drive social. All right, so I'm actually at 25 seconds left, so that's perfect timing. But we're on the last slide. So there you probably have a bunch of questions. We've got a bunch of different ways that you can start to engage with us. For tomorrow and the day after, we're hosting Lunch and Learn Roundtables. You're welcome to come by, join us. You can talk to me about social measurement, but you can also talk to my colleagues who are experts in social. We also have an Adweek exclusive. So if you didn't have time to take a picture of the score or write down notes, we have something that's coming out. I think you can Google Adweek, Viral Nation, Cultural Quotient Score, and there's something that's written out that you can actually take away and start applying to your business. And then we also have a nightcap where we're doing milk and cookies on the 4th. So that's tomorrow at 10 p.m. So hopefully we see you at any of these touch points, but we'd love to talk to you a little bit more about social and measurement and how you can do well in that medium. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
That was a conversation recorded live at Brand Week. You can find more coverage, analysis, and interviews from across the marketing and media world at adweek.com. Thanks for listening to AdSpeak. If you like the show, be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.